First of all, I'm glad that you found time. I'm glad that you settled in Singapore. And what are your impressions about your new post in Singapore?
So I'm an assistant professor at Yale and US College, which is a merger between the National University of Singapore and Yale University, a little bit like NYU Abu Dhabi. And the goal of the Yale and US College is to start a liberal arts education in Singapore. Um, so I am in the Global Affairs division, teaching a class on Southwest Asia, North Africa, politics and society. So far, that's going well. About half of my students are Singaporeans, the other half are international. There's a very strong interest in the Arab world in Singapore, and at the National University of Singapore, which I initially found surprising, especially issues about Israel and Palestine. As you know, Singapore is a very ethnically diverse society. There are Muslims, there are Chinese Singaporeans, Malay Singaporeans, Indian Singaporeans, and especially with Israel and Palestine, there are some Christian Singaporeans who are interested in it, as well as the Malay Singaporeans. So it's been an exciting opportunity to meet students here and to hear their thoughts. As you also know, many states in the Arab world look up to Singapore as an example of growth and economic prosperity. Especially, there are interesting ties or communications between the Gulf states and Singapore, trying to learn from each other. At the National University of Singapore, there's the Middle East Institute, which is very interested in fostering ties between the Gulf and Yale and US. So I've only been here a year. My colleagues are great. Students are interesting, excited, enthusiastic. And yeah, when I'm not teaching, I'm working on my book project.
What we're going to talk today is about the earned income and how women's empowerment in Jordan affects the earning of income, because Jordan is perceived for a very good reason as a patriarchal society. And what can you say about two experiments that you and your colleagues conducted regarding Jordanian economy and women empowerment?
So the project was not so much about Jordan, but more about the Arab world. And we were interested in the relationship between earned income and empowerment. So there's a big argument in developmental studies that giving women access to employment can change household dynamics. It can also change societal dynamics. So one of the arguments is that once women start earning income, they can use those resources, the money from income, to invest in themselves, to invest in their daughters, to invest in civil society, to invest in politics. And that one argument as to how women in the United States and in the West gained politically as well as socioeconomically was through access to the labor force. In more recent years, though, there's been pushback against this idea that earning income is very different than owning income. And so a woman could earn her income, but if her husband or her father then takes that income, then maybe entering the labor force might not be an avenue for empowerment. As you know, Jordan has one of the lowest rates of female labor force participation in the world. So in this paper, we were interested in testing two dynamics. The first was we wanted to see how earning relatively more income could affect relations between men and women in terms of bargaining. And the second part of the paper, we're very interested in women's preferences for employment opportunities. So there's a big debate about how to get Jordanian women into the labor force. Some projects focus on transportation, others projects focus on wages. And our big finding from this survey of women's preferences for employment opportunities is we find that Jordanian women really don't want to work with men. And so when given the opportunity to work in environments that are gender segregated, that is much more appealing for Jordanian women than work opportunities where there's mixed gender.
Do you think it's it's caused by the pressure that they face from male family members, or it's their free
So
choice?
that's our next question, right? So
Yeah.
in our first experiment, we find that when women earn money, they are influential in bargaining over how to invest that money, but only when they are with other women. So when women earn money and they have to invest this money with a man, then it doesn't really matter how much money a woman contributes. The man has more influence over how they invest this money. And so that nicely echoes or parallels what we find in the other experiment, where women really don't want to work with men. And so what I'm fascinated in, and what I'd like my future work to investigate, is what exactly is it from the male perspective of why there is this resistance, or what explains men's patriarchal attitudes. Do you have any thoughts on why? Given that you know George exponentially more than me, do these findings surprise you? What were your thoughts?
It doesn't. It doesn't surprise. No, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think the behavior of patriarchs of the family are more or less same or very similar in urban communities and in the countryside. What's your find about that?
So all of our studies were done in Amman, right?
Okay.
So we don't know what happens in the countryside.
Yeah.
We make an assumption that the countryside might be more patriarchal, but I'm not sure that's true. It could be less, right? I know that there are accounts of Bedouin women who are actually like quite empowered, depending how you define empowered, but actually active and like assertive and all that stuff. So I'm not sure if that's true. But yeah, I remember when we talked about this last year, you were telling me that there's like big resistance from men in the family, like brothers, husbands, fathers. They don't want the women in their household to leave and work because they don't trust them. I don't know.
Or especially they wouldn't like them to work in the
with
night
other
shift
men.
with men.
Or night.
Yeah, we have similar problems in our working environments, where some of my colleagues who've been working longer than me, and they're relatively well positioned, operate between 8 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock. So none of us have seen her for a year and a half or two, although we're supposed to cooperate as editors and colleagues. But normally, if I have to communicate with such colleagues, it's through WhatsApp and when they reply from home. And for me, it's unacceptable, because it's not normal not to see your colleague for 2 years.
Right.
And
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, one thing that's opening my eyes being in Southeast Asia, and so places like Singapore and Taiwan, Japan have some of the highest female labor force participation rates in the world.
Yeah.
But there are also very strong patriarchal norms here as well as in the United States. So we have this phenomenon where women are working crazy hours, but then the second they get back home, they still have to work, or like there's still these gendered norms where women do most of the housework. The amount of time taking care of the house is also unequally spared. So working through this project, I'm becoming perhaps skeptical, or at least suspicious of this notion that simply getting women into the labor force is enough to change gendered relations among men.
True. We have such examples from Far East, where cultures are very family oriented and patriarchal, but on the other hand, their work ethics allows them to operate, to work long hours, to work night shifts without any restraints. On the other hand, in the Middle East, they obviously have a different type of patriarchal society and patriarchal norms. So I think the percentage of female labor in Jordan is less than 30%. You can correct me.
25% female labor force participation rates. But you brought up norms. So do you think this is like something I'm thinking about it is like the origins of patriarchy? Is this a cultural thing?
I would say
it
it's
seems
a different type.
right?
It's a different type of patriarchal society. They're not equal. They don't have same norms. And in Judeo-Christian Muslim patriarchy, women are considered a home pillar. So their place should be at home, not at the office or at a restaurant. So
you think it's religious?
Yeah, I think it's these norms originate from monotheistic religions that are established and promoted in this part of the world.
But what about, so you spent some time in Yugoslavia and you know
Of
the
course.
former Soviet Union. Do you
Yeah.
also see these similar patriarchal norms?
Not to the same extent, although originally societies in the Balkans were also influenced by monotheistic religions and tribal and semi-tribal interactions between different groups. But in 20th century, that region underwent through a process of secularization, which didn't take place in the Middle East. So our societies used to be very similar to the Middle Eastern society 150 years ago or 100 years ago. Maybe. Yes, please.
I'm not. I think in secular societies you also see patriarchy. I don't know. I feel like if we think of places like France, or part of me I don't know if this is true and this is probably wrong, but I don't know. It seems patriarchy is pretty universal, irrespective of religion, irrespective.
You have different forms of patriarchy. Patriarchy is not a monolithic, a unisonic system. It depends on cultural models, religious dogmas, and historical development of each area in different times. Because the same society can transform in relatively short period, in 50 years or 40 years. Do you think that economic...
Has Jordan experienced...
Yeah, please.
Sorry,
yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You wanted to ask something.
I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do you think that the current economic crisis, which is additionally worsened by COVID-19, will push Jordanian and Arab females to be more involved?
More involved in the economy?
In the economy, yeah. Not in the household activities.
On a global perspective, it is argued that women have suffered disproportionately from the COVID pandemic. So normally when there are economic recessions, manufacturing and construction, male-dominated industries tend to suffer. What's different with COVID is that the service industries have been disproportionately harmed.
Yeah.
And so at least outside of Jordan, these industries tend to be dominated or have greater representation of women. Uh, Making matters worse, when schools are closed, then the burden of taking care of kids often also falls back on women. And so now many women, in addition, for those who are employed, in addition to trying to keep their work, if they have access to remote work, they're often also tasked with taking care of the kids as well as doing household chores and stuff. So there's a big concern that on a global level, COVID has further exacerbated inequalities between men and women. Now, with regards to Jordan, I think it's hard to tell, given that women in Jordan already had very, very low rates of female labor force participation. Um, I don't know if it decreased even more. I suspect that many Jordanian women, those women who are employed in the formal economy, are involved in services, specifically education and stuff like that. So that's also had an impact. But I think it's also important to say, I think schools were closed in Jordan, right?
Yeah, and
And so that,
lots of businesses shut down,
yeah,
including the major pharmaceutical company, major chain of pharmacies,
yeah.
Pharmacy One. I don't know, maybe
Oh,
you heard about that. They
yeah,
shut
of course.
down.
It's closed?
Yeah, they announced the bankruptcy. I don't know was the reason for bankruptcy because they were very successful in the last 15 years,
They're all over.
and they were all over.
Yeah.
Do you
I
think
figure
it's
pharmacies would do
listen? Do you
great, right?
think it's some kind of a scheme, some kind of money laundering scheme or machination? Because it doesn't sound likely that a super successful multi maybe multi-billion operation like Pharmacy One went bankrupt overnight.
I don't know. Going back to your question about COVID and women
Yeah,
employment, um, if COVID allows for more remote work, then maybe Jordanian women might be more open to remote work and places that are typically mixed, right, with men and women, um, if it's remote. So my co-authors, Amani Jamal and Carolyn Barnett and I, we have an op-ed that I'll send to you after this interview,
please.
where,
Yeah.
where we think about like online work in the Middle East and whether or not COVID could enhance women's labor force participation by enabling online work for women who are privileged enough to have access to online, to the internet to do work.
When the pandemic started in mid-March last year, we've been operating from our homes until June 1st, when we resumed our operations in a printed form, mostly because of ads that generate profits for the newspaper. And so far, they didn't develop online ads as they develop their standard ads in printed media. So although at least half of employees still work from their homes, core workers or people who were essential for the operation have to go on a daily basis and work from the newsroom. We shortened our working hours, our working week, from 6 days to 5 days. On Thursday, editors operate from homes, like myself, while other staff, proofreaders and montagists, are off. So instead of 6 days, we work 5 days a week, which enables me to spend more time preparing conversations with different scholars like yourself, and recording all kinds of material, and writing articles on history of the Middle East and archaeology. So for me, COVID-19 wasn't that bad.
Is there less to cover given that there are less events these days?
You mean you're asking about different lectures and
Yeah.
webinars?
How do you?
I
Yeah.
cover webinars, mostly webinars, since we don't have classical public lectures and receptions. I'm really missing these events. But on the other hand, webinars are more efficient, easier to organize. You can gather 4 or 5 experts from 5 different countries or 5 different continents at the same time, and you can disseminate knowledge through webinars. We'll see how long the crisis will continue. It depends also on the number of people who receive jabs and efficiency of vaccines that are available on the market. Over here, sorry?
Are Jordan's borders open? People travel to Jordan or no?
Yeah, people can travel. People can travel, but of course they have to undergo all kinds of medical checkups and quarantines. So you cannot travel normally, but of course, if you're vaccinated and you have certificate about your vaccination, you follow one type of the procedure than people who didn't get the vaccine. It will be very complicated for people who are not vaccinated to travel in the coming period. I don't think that borders are going to be open or completely open for at least a couple of years. We have all kinds of conspiracy theorists who think that the COVID pandemic is created in order to depopulate population of the world, to control their movements, and to affect personal freedoms and the ability of individuals to normally roam around and attend mass events.
So you're very pessimistic about the tourism industry in Jordan?
Yeah, tourism industry is very affected, badly affected by COVID-19. We'll see how they're going to cope in coming months. I don't think tourism will go back to the level of 2018 and 19 anytime soon. Most of tourists these days are local visitors. And as I said, it depends on the number of vaccinated people and how different countries will handle the COVID pandemic and people who are interested in traveling. So yes,
isn't this an opportunity for ACOR and the Jordanian government to like raise awareness amongst Jordanians about all the cool kind of like Petra, all the like archaeology in Jordan?
Yeah, true. It's a good opportunity for the local tourism, for local visitors, and maybe prices will go down because Jordanian tourism was pretty expensive. Rates were insanely high, especially in places like Petra.
Right.
And you remember that a can of Coca-Cola was 3 or 4 Jordanian dinars in Petra, in a restaurant.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So if they have ideas to boost domestic tourism, they should be more realistic regarding their prices.
Oh, for
But
sure.
but so far the pandemic is not curbed. Every day we have between 85, 150 dead people. So whoever believes that COVID-19 is a seasonal flu should check a shrink. Still, we have such people. We have such people who are denying the magnitude of the new virus. Probably 50 million people should die until they realize that it's not a seasonal flu or cold. How's the situation in Singapore regarding COVID? We know that in the US, the government managed to vaccinate over 35% of the population, right?
So in Singapore, our numbers are very, very low in terms of COVID. The borders are closed, and most of our cases come from people arriving in. So when you arrive in Singapore, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks in a hotel.
Mm.
So we have very few cases within the community. Usually it's like 1 or 2 a day.
Wow. It sounds
yeah.
like Jordan in first 6 months. Jordan had similar results in first 6 months.
Yeah. So life here is pretty normal. We have to wear masks, but otherwise gyms are open, restaurants are open.
Excellent.
Bars close at 10:30. But life here is pretty normal, which is I'm very lucky to be here. In terms of vaccines, I think things are going slow. Or the last I heard is people under 45 aren't going to have access to vaccines till June, which seems much slower than in the UK or the US right now.
Yeah, the rate
But I'm
in
not.
the US, the rate in the US is very high. I think they managed to vaccinate over 150 million people.
Yeah, most of my family in the US, especially anyone older than 30, has been vaccinated. At least have one jab.
Yeah.
So, and I think part of it is when you're a small country like Singapore, you don't have producers of the vaccine, so they have to import everything. And I think a lot of the big countries like the United States and the UK are prioritizing vaccinating their people before exporting the products they're producing. So I think Jordan might be in a similar bind. How are vaccination rates in Jordan?
Vaccination rates in Jordan are not that high. Actually, unlike Israel and unlike Serbia, Serbia has a very high rate of vaccinated citizens. But after they managed to vaccinate around 30% of the population or 35% of the population, the rest has been very skeptical towards any kind of COVID jabs, because in Serbia we have very strong anti-vax movement, so people are separated in their opinions. They have opposing opinions about the whole thing regarding the pandemic. Also, measures over there were not tough enough. It's not like Jordan, where military and police can impose curfew at 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and if someone goes out without a permit, they'll pay hefty fines. Over there, they're more lenient, and I have the impression that the regime is supporting both pro-vax and anti-vax camps for their political goals and purposes. On the other hand, the abundance of vaccines in Serbia, allowed the government to offer free vaccines for anyone who comes from outside and wants to get a jab, including citizens from neighboring countries. So they were playing very well with vaccine diplomacy. They were exporting extra vaccines left and right, and they gained more popularity in the region from countries that are normally hostile towards Serbia and vice versa.
Like Kosovo?
Yeah, everyone can come from Croatia or from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, they exported extra vaccines to countries in the region. Citizens from any of these states could have come and get their jab. Even my sister was planning to travel to Belgrade and get vaccinated over there, but in the last moment she decided it's not practical. But some of her colleagues who are Croats traveled all the way to Belgrade to get vaccinated because Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia didn't provide sufficient number or enough vaccines for their population. So you have countries that are playing well in this crisis. Jordan also did very well economically by producing masks and protective
Yeah.
suits. Maybe
Is
you
Hikmat
learn about that. They produced. I mean, this is the old information from last year when they produced 120 million masks.
is this Hikmat?
I don't know. Maybe it's Hikmat. They exported masks and
hand sanitizer, right?
yeah, gloves and
Hygiene or something.
protective suits. So
Yeah.
some sectors are making extra profit. Medical sector, pharmaceutical sector. Unlike
Why did Omar Razaz? Why did Omar Razaz step down? It seems like he was doing a good
he was
job.
doing very well. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think first of all, my prediction in 2018 in May June when mass demonstrations or mass protests, relatively massive protests, because over here we don't have demonstrations like in Lebanon or in Iraq. Force the regime to put Razaz in charge. I don't think that he was a bad prime minister. On the contrary, lots of people think that he was one of the best. And he managed to survive for 2.5 years. My prediction in June 2018 was that in a few months he's going to start reshuffling government, which happened in fall of the same year. And I lost the count how many times he changed his team. But unfortunately, he couldn't complete 4 years. The only person who completed a 4-year term was Abdullah Mansur.
Right.
He's the only one. I don't know any prime minister in Jordan since mid 90s who survived 4 years. So Razaz managed to operate for 2.5 years in very difficult circumstances. I think he was a better solution than the current prime minister. And in some of these crises that we witness, our prime minister was very quiet. You haven't heard a word, iota from him, let's say in the last 2-3 weeks. Normally, prime ministers here are punching bags. This is their role, to absorb all kinds of criticism directed to other political centers who are more influential than the prime minister and his team. So with COVID-19 and the high unemployment, some of my friends and our friends, our mutual friends recently told me that unemployment is 25%, which is very high.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll have more material for other studies that you're planning to conduct regarding Jordanian and Arab work.
So I think my next study is going to be about small states and development. So
what will be your models?
So I'm going to look at states in the Gulf.
Yeah.
So Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, but
Yeah,
also look at small states around.
Yeah, they're really small states. Jordan at least has 12 million people. Okay, 10 million citizens and a couple of million refugees. And they're all workforce.
Yeah. So I'm going to look at, places like the Seychelles. So some small states are very economically successful. Other small states are not. And I'm trying to figure out why.
And for the end, I have the last question. What do you think about the impact of COVID-19 on the US economy? Forget about small states. Small states might be cute and interesting to live in, but what about the major players? Because major players are the ones who dictate the game, and they affect small states. How you find COVID-19 in the US?
I think it's been devastating to the US economy. If you look at unemployment rates, if you look at growth, I think without a doubt, COVID has had a detrimental impact on the well-being of the United States and all nations have suffered.
Do you think that Biden's administration are going to have an impact and improve the economy?
Well, it seems that the vaccination program so far has been quite successful. People who don't like Biden think it's because of Trump. Trump's I don't know, but it seems I think most Americans are relieved to have a president that seems a little bit more like a traditional president, who's always constantly in the news, constantly fighting, trying to be divisive. That said, there's still major political challenges in the United States. Currently, there's a big controversy over voting rights or access to, or challenges or barriers to voting, specifically in Georgia right now. So I don't think just because we have a new president that many of the cultural and societal challenges that haunted the Trump
administration. It will remain because these societal challenges exist for a long time. And it's very difficult to eliminate them in 4 years. It will take much more.
Right. What about in Jordan? Are most Jordanians relieved or happy about a Biden administration? Is there any longing for President Trump?
Political establishments has higher hopes in Biden. For many of them, Trump's administration was a setback and a few steps backwards when he took over in 2016. On the other hand, Trump's administration managed to initiate the series of diplomatic moves towards mutual recognition between Israel and different Arab states. So that trend will continue with Biden. I don't think that relations between Arab states and Israel or mutual recognition and normalization will stop. This is the trend. This is the policy that will continue in coming years. I personally believe that if normalization of ties contributes to stability of the region, stability of the economy, then it would be a step towards a better future. I don't think that constant conflicts, warfare, crisis, sectarian violence can bring anything good, not only in the Middle East, but in general, in any part of the world. Yeah.
I'm sure the political establishment is happy that Bill Burns is in charge of the CIA now.
Maybe. That's a good question.
Yeah. Cool. I need to get going. My fiance can come over soon, and I need to at least pretend.
We'll continue our conversations. And
yeah, please.
I'm going to say. Yeah,
sorry,
I'm going to continue conversation with you. This is just. It was just the initial talk, and here I wish you a good day, good health.
Yeah.
And we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, sorry I kept pushing this back. Right now the semester is crazy with like teaching, and I'm glad we could find time. I'm gonna email you a few. So we wrote a blog, and then we did an interview. So maybe I think that it could give you better insight and explain a little bit better our paper and our findings.
I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to receiving the material and reading what you sent, and also I'm looking forward to seeing you back in Amman when all circumstances allow us for another meeting and for having a couple of drinks in the
hopefully in a year.
All the best.
Yeah, take care. Tell Maher I say hi.
I will. Bye.